point in my life, it was a low point in general. That the serious thought of quitting came to mind. It was not long after I had been in New York, which was already quite the adjustment. But of course, then the recession happened. And prior to that, I was already struggling because a little bit naive on my part. I thought, oh, I could get a job at a gallery or a museum and be in the industry. And just didn't realize that most of those jobs went to people of higher economic status than myself, because they were extremely low paying jobs if they paid at all, and they relied on their employees' status. So wasn't getting any jobs in that way. Plus, with 9/11 having happened, just there just weren't those type of jobs necessarily.
So,
So
when you said recession, I thought you were meaning the 7-8 recession, but you were there right after 9/11.
yeah, I graduated right around 9/11,
Mhm.
moved to New York. And so that's what I'm saying, like the leading up to the recession, those few years in between
Yeah,
9/11 to recession was already a big struggle.
yeah. Okay, I
Yeah,
see.
so I was working in like, doing window displays, a lot of overnight work. And in kind of the interior design world. And it kind of didn't matter where I had been in the last 5 years, I still would have had the same result of being laid off because everyone in that industry was laid off.
Yeah.
But I was already just extremely frustrated because at the time, at least, and I think they have fixed this now, thankfully, employers were allowed to pay you just a tiny increase from whatever your last job was, not what the job was worth. And so because I was coming from literally the poorest county in California, even though I had management experience and all this. So they always wanted to hire me because I had great experience and skill sets, and they could get away with paying me half as much as the other employees.
That's total BS.
Yes. So for the first 5 years,
Oh,
I changed jobs constantly because you're trying to just constantly get that tiny little bit of fraction of
right.
increase to just be at the same level as people. There was all these other kids my same age. It was their first job, so they just got paid what the job was worth. It was really really frustrating.
That's incredibly frustrating.
Yes, it was incredibly frustrating. And to add on to it, a lot of those coworkers, or sometimes even my own assistants, were MFA grads from Yale and Columbia.
Oh,
And so in my head, I was like, if you go to those schools, like the top schools, and you come from a better economic background, all these things, and you're just still going to have the job that I have right now. I was feeling very depressed. I was like, what chance do I ever have? And then, of course, the recession hits and added on to all those feelings of like, I should just give up because there's no chance for somebody like me.
yeah.
Um, but in a weird way, that recession ended up propelling my art career because I ended up getting a wonderful part-time job for a creative couple that really supported
Mm.
and encouraged my artistic endeavors in the way I'd never had kind of, older generations do before. And I also got money from the government from having being laid off. And so those two things together really kind of set me up to be able to sustain my practice. Imagine if the government always did that.
Right.
I remember hearing after the pandemic, quite a few artists said the same thing. They're like, this is the first time I ever had a paycheck I could rely on. And it just like propelled their careers.
Yeah.
So that was
I
kind of,
always like during the .com boom and then bust. I worked as a receptionist in one of the .coms, and I just prayed to get laid off so that I could just have money to just float, so I could just make work. Because I was right out of grad school too. It was like 99, 2000. I was gonna ask you. Who helped you through. Who were your helpers through that time? But you answered it, saying this couple that just gave you kind of a leg up through a job, but also encouragement and support. I mean, that's amazing.
yeah, it was a creative couple. One was an actor, one was an artist. And I remember It sounds really funny because it's a well-known person, but they on Craigslist had put an ad up that they needed an assistant, and I'm gonna get rid of this little whatever pop-up this is. Um, they had, yeah, put an ad on Craigslist that they were looking for an assistant. All they asked was, they said, we would prefer it be an artist or a creative person and live near this neighborhood that we live in.
Yeah.
And I was laid off about a week before the holidays. And I remember on the news, they said across the country, about 1 million people had been laid off that same month.
Yeah.
And any listing anywhere seemed to have 1,000 plus resumes within an hour, maybe. So
Yeah.
I didn't have any expectations whatsoever. I just kind of wrote back. I was like, well, I'm an artist and I live in the neighborhood right next to you. I don't
Yeah.
think I even attached a resume.
You're
I
just
just
like,
thought,
hey, I'm here. I'm so tired.
yeah, I was just like, I have no chance. And then to top, pile onto all of it, I had just gotten married a few months prior, and we had already paid for a trip to go on. So I was like, any job that potentially even wanted to hire me, I'd be like, well, I've already paid for this trip, so I'm going. So I was like, no one's going to want to hire me anyways. And we met. We got along amazingly. I like to think of them as kind of like an adopted aunt and uncle. And because they had done it, they had really gone from nothing themselves. They were not from artsy families, they were not from wealth, and had really built themselves lives in these industries. And then it was not only them, but then their circle of friends, were poets and dancers and documentary filmmakers and just all these incredibly creative people that we're all just like excited to have this young person around who is also interested, and like, yeah, keep going, They'd let me borrow their car to schlep art around and take time off if I got a residency, and just like the most supportive people I could have asked for, basically. So that definitely got me out of that quitting zone, but yeah, that was definitely the closest I ever got.
Yeah, that's huge. And I know you have other, because we talk frequently, but do you have other things that you were thinking, well, if I do quit, I'm going to do this. I'm really good at XYZ. I'm just going to keep doing that and make these things that I make much smaller or not at all, or
Well, my fallback plan was I got in a minor in theater set design. Um, and I did get a few random jobs when I first moved to New York for like off Broadway, and it was all the connections here or there, but I, I didn't realize that it was all union, and how many like real connections you had to have to even get invited to the union, all these different things.
Hmm.
So it just turned out to be a lot more challenging path than I thought it would be. But kind of to your second question, that could have been, I had a route of my life that could have gone that way, definitely. And I didn't grow up in an artsy place there, but my art high school teachers saw something in me and created this whole program, so that the students could be recognized for excellence in the arts in the same way that students for math and science were. Um, and part of that was doing an internship. And because there was no gallery, there wasn't even a little art center, definitely not a local artist around. The best that she could do was get me an internship at the university in their theater department and with the Santa Caner. Um, and they loved me. I guess, one of the things they find hardest to teach young students is mixing paint, not only to the correct tones, but the correct quantities. Because quite often you might make, a small little jar full of paint, you test it out and you see if that's the right color. And then she'd be like, okay, I'm going to need 3 gallons of this, or I'm going to need 5 gallons of this. And typically when students come in, I mean, they end up usually making way more than they should have because they're making mistakes constantly and trying to um, correct those mistakes. And I just had a natural knack for it. And she was like, you can even do dry tests, which at that university, they usually just did a wet test. So you test if the color is the same wet. But like in Hollywood, they do dry tests where it says dry actually to the same tone. And I just was a natural at that. And they even had me teaching, even though I was in high school, the college students, and offered
Did
me
they
to
pay
go.
you for that? Was
That
it
was
a
an
paid?
internship. That was an internship, so I didn't really get paid.
Back then,
Uh,
internships were not paid, and it was also BS.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I get that you were in high school. You're not complaining, but I'm complaining on behalf of those of us who didn't do internships because they weren't paid back then. None of them
Oh
were.
no, yeah. I definitely could not have done it once I was out of my parents' home and on my own because at least I had a place to live and food. Um,
Yeah.
but what they did is they offered me a pretty fantastic scholarship to go to school there.
Ooh,
But the problem was it was the local school and I wanted out of there.
yeah.
And I'd had my heart set on studying art. They just didn't have that as an option. But that could have if I had taken that route. You know, she was really trying to convince me. She was like, we're going to give you the scholarship. You'll be such a stand up because everyone who wants to come into the theater department wants to be an actor and you're going to excel. And I worked in Hollywood for 20 years. I can set you up when you graduate. Like I could have had that life.
And this was
And
in California?
this was in California. Yeah. And same thing happened actually when I went to college. I worked at the theater department. And again, I think rare that they get artists overlapping into the theater, so they get really excited about it. And again, the scenic artist there was when I was graduating, going, "I really want you to take over my job. I'm just not ready to retire for another couple of years. Can you hold out?" I was like, "No, no, I'm not going to do that."